Hello, welcome to Key Philosophies, where today we'll be going over the greater and lesser mysteries. The Eleusinian mysteries, as read from Manly P. Hall's book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. And it won't be too long. The most famous of the ancient religious mysteries were the Eleusinian, whose rites were celebrated every 5 years in the city of Eleusis to honor Ceres, also known as Demeter, Rhea, or Isis, and her daughter, Persephone. The initiates of the Eleusinian school were famous throughout Greece for the beauty of their philosophic concepts and the high standards of morality which they demonstrated in their daily lives. Because of their excellence, these mysteries spread to Rome and Britain, and later the initiations were given in both these countries. The Eleusinian mysteries, named for the community in Attica where the sacred dramas were first presented, are generally believed to have been founded by Eumolpos about 1400 years before the birth of Christ, and through the Platonic system of philosophy, their principles have been preserved to modern times. The rites of Eleusis, with their mystic interpretations of nature's most precious secrets, overshadowed the civilizations of their time and gradually absorbed many smaller schools, incorporating into their own system whatever valuable information these lesser institutions possessed. Hecathorn sees in the mysteries of Ceres and Bacchus the metamorphosis of the rites of Isis and Osiris, and there is every reason to believe that all so called secret schools of the ancient world were branches from one philosophic tree, which, with its roots in heaven and its branches in earth, is, like the spirit of man, an invisible but present, ever present cause of the objectified vehicles that give it expression. The mysteries were the channels through which this one philosophic light was disseminated, and their initiates, resplendid with the intellectual and spiritual understanding, were the perfect fruitage of the divine tree, bearing witness before the material world of the recondite source of all light and truth. The rites of Eleusis were divided into what were called the lesser and the greater mysteries. According to James Garden, the lesser mysteries were celebrated in the spring, probably at the time of the vernal equinox, in the town of Agre, and the greater in the fall, the time of the autumnal equinox, at Eleusis or Athens. It is supposed that the former were given annually and the latter every 5 years. The rituals of the Eleusinians were highly involved, and to understand them required a deep study of Greek mythology, which they interpreted in its esoteric light with the aid of their secret keys. The lesser mysteries were dedicated to Persephone. In his Eleusinian and Bacchic mysteries, Thomas Taylor sums up their purpose as follows. The lesser mysteries were designed by the ancient theologists, their founders, to signify occultly the conditions of the unpurified soul invested with an earthly body and enveloped in a material and physical nature. The legend used in the lesser rites is that of the abduction of the goddess Persephone, the daughter of Ceres, by Plato, the lord of the underworld, or Hades. While Persephone is picking flowers in the beautiful meadow, the earth suddenly opens up. The gloomy lord of death, riding in a magnificent chariot, emerges from its somber depths and grasping her in his arms, carries the screaming and struggling goddess to his subterranean palace, where he forces her to become his queen. It is doubtful whether many of these initiates themselves understood the mystic meaning of this allegory, for most of them apparently believed that it referred solely to the succession of the seasons. It is difficult to obtain satisfactory information concerning the mysteries, for the candidates were bound by inviolable oaths never to reveal their inner secrets to the profane. That's you and me. At the beginning of the ceremony of initiation, the candidates stood upon the skins of animals sacrificed for the purpose, and vowed that death should seal his lips before he would divulge the sacred truths which were bound to be communicated to him. Through indirect channels, however, some of their secrets have been preserved. The teachings given to the neophytes were substantially as follows. The soul of man, often called psyche, and in the Eleusinian mysteries symbolized by Persephone, is essentially a spiritual being or a spiritual thing. Its true home is in the higher worlds, where free from the bondage of material form and material concepts, it is said to be truly alive and self expressive. The human or physical nature of man, according to this doctrine, is a tomb, a quagmire, a false and impermanent thing, the source of all sorrow and suffering. Plato describes the body as the sepulchre of the soul, and by this he means not only the human form, but also the human nature. The gloom and depression of the lesser mysteries represented the agony of the spiritual soul, unable to express itself because it has accepted the limitations and illusion of the human environment. The crux of the Eleusinian argument was that man is neither better nor wiser after death than during life. If he does not rise above ignorance during his sojourn here, man goes at death into eternity, to wander about forever, making the same mistakes which he made here. If he does not outgrow the desire for material possessions here, he will carry it with him into the invisible world, where, because he can never gratify the desire, he will continue in endless agony. Dante's Inferno is symbolically descriptive of the sufferings of those who never freed their spiritual natures from the cravings, habits, viewpoints, and limitations of their plutonic personalities. Those who made no endeavor to improve themselves, whose souls have slept during their physical lives, pass at death into Hades, where, lying in rows, they slept through all eternity as they had slept through life. To the Eleusinian philosophers, birth into the physical world was death into the fullest sense of the word. And the only true birth was that of the spiritual soul, the man rising out of the womb of his own fleshly nature. The soul is dead that slumbers, says Longfellow, and in this he strikes the keynote of the Eleusinian mysteries. Just as Narcissus, gazing at himself in the water, the ancients used this mobile element to symbolize the transitory, illusionary, material universe. But just as he gazed at himself in the water, he lost his life trying to embrace a reflection. So man, gazing into the mirror of nature and accepting as his real self and senseless clay that he sees reflected, loses the opportunity afforded by physical life to unfold his immortal, invisible self. An ancient initiate once said that the living are ruled by the dead. Only those conversant with the Eleusinian concept of life could understand that statement. It meant that the majority of people are not ruled by their living spirits, but by their senseless, hence dead, animal personalities. Transmigration and reincarnation were taught in these mysteries, but in a somewhat unusual manner. It was believed that at midnight the invisible worlds were closest to the terrestrial sphere, and that souls coming into material existence slipped in during the midnight hour. For this reason, many of the Eleusinian ceremonies were performed at midnight. Some of those sleeping spirits who had failed to awaken their higher natures during the earth life, and who now floated around in the invisible worlds, surrounded by a darkness of their own making, occasionally slipped through at this hour and assumed the forms of various creatures. The mystics of Eleusis, rather, also laid stress upon the evil of suicide, explaining that there was a profound mystery concerning this crime of which they could not speak, but warning their disciples that a great sorrow comes to all those who take their own lives. This, in substance, constitutes the esoteric doctrine given to the initiates of the lesser mysteries. As the degree dealt largely with the miseries of those who failed to make the best use of their philosophic opportunities. The chambers of initiation were subterranean, and the horrors of Hades were vividly depicted in a complicated ritualistic dogma. After passing successfully through the torturous pathways with their trials and dangers, the candidate received the honorary title of Mystus. This meant one who saw through the veil, or who had a clouded vision. It also signified that the candidate had been brought up to the veil, which would be torn away in the higher degree. The modern word mystic, as referring to a seeker after truth according to the dictates of the heart along the path of faith, is probably derived from this ancient word, for faith is believed in the reality of things unseen or veiled. The greater mysteries, into which the candidate was admitted only after he had successfully passed through the ordeals of the lesser, and not always then either, were sacred to Ceres, the mother of Persephone, and presented her as wandering through the world in quiet of her abducted excuse me, and represented her as wandering through the world in quest of her abducted daughter. Ceres carried two torches, intuition and reason, to aid her in the search for her lost child, who was the soul, mind you. At last she found Persephone not far from Eleusis, and out of gratitude taught the people there to cultivate corn, which is sacred to her. She also founded the mysteries. Ceres appeared before Pluto, god of the souls of the dead, and pleaded with him to allow Persephone to return to her home. This the god at first refused to do, because Persephone had eaten of the pomegranate, the fruit of mortality. At last, however, he compromised and agreed to permit Persephone to live in the upper world half of the year if she would stay with him in the darkness of Hades for the remaining half. The Greeks believed that Persephone was a manifestation of the solar energy, which in the winter months lived under the earth with Pluto, but in the summer returned again with the goddess of productiveness. There is a legend that follows that flowers loved Persephone, and that every year when she left for the dark realm of Pluto, the plants and shrubs would die of grief. While the profane and uninitiated had their own opinions on the subject. The truth of the Greek allegories remained safely concealed by the priests, who alone recognized the sublimity of these great philosophic and religious parables. Thomas Taylor epitomizes the doctrine of the greater mysteries in the following statement: The greater mysteries, obscurely intimated by the mystic and splendid visions, the felicity of the soul, both here and hereafter, when purified from the defilement of the material nature, and constantly elevated to the realities of intellectual spiritual vision. Just as the lesser mysteries discuss the prenatal epoch of man, when the consciousness of its 9-day embryological months was descending into the realm of illusion and assuming the veil of unreality, so the greater mysteries discussed in the principle of spiritual regeneration and revealed to initiates not only the simplest but also the most direct and complete method of liberating their higher natures from the bondage of material ignorance. Like Prometheus chained to the top of Mount Caucasus, man's higher nature is chained to his inadequate personality. The 9 days of initiation were also symbolic of the 9 spheres through which the human soul descends during the process of assuming a terrestrial form. The secret exercises for spiritual unfoldment given to disciples of the higher degrees are unknown, but there is every reason to believe that they were similar to the Brahmic mysteries, since it is known that the Eleusinian ceremonies were closed with the Sanskrit word konks om pax. The part of the allegory referring to the 2 6 months periods, during one of which was Persephone had to remain with Pluto, and while the others she had to remain and revisit the upper world, offering material for deep consideration. It is probable that the Eleusinians realized that the soul left the body during sleep, or at least was made incapable of leaving by or at least was made capable of leaving by the special training, which undoubtedly they were in position to give. Thus, Persephone would remain as the queen of Pluto's realm during the waking hours, but would ascend to the spiritual world during the periods of sleep. The initiate was taught how to intercede with Pluto to permit Persephone, the initiate's soul, to ascend from the darkness of his material nature into the light of understanding. When thus freed from the shackles of clay and crystallized concepts, the initiate was liberated not only for the period of his life, but for all eternity, for never thereafter was he divested of those soul qualities, which after death were his vehicles for manifestation and expression in the so-called heaven world. Now you'll see lots of stuff relating to out-of-body experiences. Robert Monroe's out-of-body experiences, there's a trilogy on that. He ran a school teaching out-of-body experiences. Very, very similar stuff when you really get down to it. In contrast to the idea of Hades as a state of darkness below, the gods were said to inhabit the tops of mountains, a well-known example being Mount Olympus, where the 12 deities of the Greek pantheon were said to dwell together. In his initiatory wanderings, the neophyte therefore entered chambers of ever-increasing brilliancy to portray the ascent of the spirit from the lower worlds into the realms of bliss. As the climax to such wanderings, he entered a great vaulted room, in the search of which stood a brilliant illuminated statue of the goddess Ceres. Here, in the presence of the Hierophant and surrounded by priests in magnificent robes, he was instructed in the highest of the sacred mysteries of the Eleusis. At the conclusion of this ceremony, he was hailed as an epoptis, which means one who has held or seen directly. For this reason, also initiation was termed autopsy. The epoptis was then given certain sacred books, probably written in cipher, together with tablets of stone on which secret instructions were engraved. The obelisk in Freemasonry, John A. Weiss describes the officiating personages of the Eleusinian Mysteries as consisting of a male and female hierophant who directed the initiations, the male and female torchbearer, a male herald, and a male and female altar attendant. There were also numerous minor officials. He states that, according to Porphyry, the hierophant represents Plato's Demiurgus, the creator of the world, the torchbearer, the sun, the altarman, the moon, the herald is Hermes or Mercury, the messenger, and the other officials, minor stars. From the records available, a number of strange and apparent supernatural phenomena accompany the rituals. Many initiates claim to have actually seen the living gods themselves, whether this was a result of religious ecstasy or the actual cooperation of invisible powers with the visible priests, must remain a mystery. In the Metamorphosis or Golden Ass, that's a donkey, Apuleius thus describes that in all probability is his initiation into the mysteries. And this is, I approached to the confines of death, and I have trod on the threshold of Persephone. I returned from it, being carried through all the elements. At midnight I saw the sun shining with a splendid light, and I manifestly drew near to the gods beneath and the gods above, and proximately adored them. Women and children were admitted to the Eleusinian mysteries, and at one time there were literally thousands of initiates, because this vast host was not prepared for the highest spiritual and mystical doctrines. A division necessarily took place within the society itself. So they created classes. The higher teachers were given to only a limited the higher teachings were given only to a limited number of initiates who, because of the superior mentality, showed a comprehensive grasp of their underlying philosophical concepts, which may have been true. Socrates refused to be initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries. For knowing its principles without being a member of the order, he realized that a membership would seal his tongue. He didn't want to do that. The mysteries of Eleusis were based upon great and eternal truths, or that these mysteries of Eleusis were based on great and eternal truths is attested by the veneration in which they were held by the great minds of the ancient world. As M. Arvarov asks, would Pindar, Plato, Cicero, Epictetus have spoken of them with such admiration if the Hierophant had satisfied himself with loudly proclaiming his own opinions or those of his order? I don't know how to even say that. But you might get the point. I might if I read it again. The garments in which candidates were initiated were preserved for many years and were believed to possess almost sacred properties. Just as the soul can have no covering save wisdom or virtue, so the candidates, being as yet without true knowledge, were presented to the mysteries unclothed, being first given a skin of an animal, and later a consecrated robe to symbolize the philosophic teachings received by the initiate. During the course of initiation, the candidate passed through two gates. The first led down into the lower worlds and symbolized his birth into ignorance. The second led upward into a room brilliantly lit by unseen lamps, in which was the statue Ceres, and which symbolized the upper world, or the abode of light and truth. Strabo states that the great temple Eleusis would hold between 20 and 30,000 people. The caves dedicated by Zarathustra also had these two doors, symbolizing the avenues of birth and death. The following paragraph from Periphery gives a fairly adequate conception of the Eleusinian symbolism. God being a luminous principle, residing in the midst of the most subtle fire, he remains forever invisible to the eyes of those who do not elevate themselves above material lives. On this account, the sight of the transparent bodies, such as crystal, Parian marble, and even ivory, recalls the idea of divine light, as the sight of gold excites an idea of its purity. For gold cannot be sullied. Some have thought by a black stone was signified a invisibility of the divine essence, to express supreme reason. The divinity was represented under the human form, and beautiful, for God is the source of beauty, of different ages, and in different attitudes, sitting or upright, of one or the other sex, as a virgin or a young man, a husband or a bride, that all the shades and gradations might be marked. Everything luminous was subsequently attributed to the gods, the sphere, and all that is spherical to the universe, to the sun and to the moon, sometimes to fortune and to hope, the circle and all circular figures to eternity, to the celestial movements, to the circles and zones of the heavens, the section of the circles to the phases of the moons, and the pyramids and obelisks to the igneous principle, and through that to the gods of heaven. A cone expresses the sun, a cylinder the earth, the phallus and triangle, a symbol of the matrix. Designated generation. Designated generation? From the essay On the Mysteries of Eleusis by M. Arvorov. The Eleusinian mysteries, according to Heckethorn, survived all others and did not cease to exist in the institutions until nearly 400 years after Christ, when they were finally suppressed by Theodosius the Great, who cruelly destroyed all who did not accept the Christian faith. Of this greatest of all philosophical institutions, Cicero said that it taught men not only how to live, but also how to die. That's an interesting concept. As it pertains to out-of-body travel and, well, just the way people live their lives. Well, here is another esoteric teaching, as according to Mr. Hall this time. I'll see you again for the Orphic Mysteries. Till next time, have a great evening.